Hi guys, today we're going to be learning about Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the highest mountain on Earth and rises 8,849 meters above sea level. When you did some of your work previously looking at mountain ranges, you would have seen that Mount Everest is one of the mountains in the Himalayas. It's actually one of about 30 different peaks that you can find in the Himalayas, but it is the largest indeed. To compare that with the mountains we've looked at in England and the United Kingdom, the highest mountain in the United Kingdom is Ben Nevis, and that's only 1,344 metres, and Snowdon, which is 1,085 metres above sea level. So it's a lot taller than the other ones we've seen. So let me start you off with a photograph here. This is a photograph, a very famous photograph from quite a long time ago. I wonder if anyone knows who this person is in the photograph. And if you do know who it is, well done. It's also a bit of a trick question because often people assume the person in this photograph is a man called Edmund Hillary, who was the first person to lead an expedition and climb Mount Everest in 1953. However, that's actually his companion on the journey, a man called Tenzing Norgay, who is a Sherpa, which is somebody who lives nearby in a local town. He actually helped on the journey because he knew the area, he was acclimatized and things as well. And he had the photo taken of him because Edmund Hillary wasn't sure that the time to teach his partner how to use a camera was on top of Mount Everest. So he actually did, the photo is of Tenzing Norgay, not of Edmund Hillary, who is the man we're going to be looking at and learning about today. So first things first, you can pause the video here and come back to it in a second, but use Google Earth or Google Maps or an atlas if you have one or something, probably just using Google Maps. Locate Mount Everest. Have a look where it is. Have a look at some of the pictures that show up on Google Earth. Have a look at some of the things around it, talking about the information it provides to you when you Google Mount Everest. Have a quick look and familiarize yourself with some things you can see at Mount Everest. So here is Mount Everest here. You may have seen this picture when looking through. It's actually located in a national park, and most of the people who live in the Everest region are Sherpa or Sherpas who live in the north of the peak, and that's where if you were to go and climb Mount Everest, often people who are Sherpas will help escort you as they are sort of acclimatized. They're used to the general environment of living on the side of the mountain. People who live there do quite a lot of farming. You can still grow things like potatoes and wheat, lentils and rice and things on the side of the mountain lower down, and that's kind of what they use for food and things. And there's also some local forests and things where they can make timber and things for building and firewood and to keep warm and look after animals and things as well. But a huge portion of the jobs in this part of the world will be tourism-based jobs. People who are helping with the climbers, helping manage the treks, operating tours, or providing like lodging or cooking for different people as well. And it really would change the environment a lot. As well as that, there are animals on the mountain, things like yaks. These yaks are used extensively in the region, mostly to transport goods around. Because they're tough and resilient animals with thick, hairy fur that helps them sort of stay warm, and they're adjusted to living at these high altitudes. And they pull things like plows through the fields to till the fields, and also they can use their milk. They're like cows, so their milk can be used to make butter and yogurt and other things as well. And often it's used for like the tea of the explorers and things alongside that. They also used yak dung, some of the yak dung, to plaster the walls of their houses and things as well. Interesting, but true. So here we can see some of the names of different parts of the mountain. Some of these are probably familiar to you from previous lessons. The peak or the summit is just another word for the top of the mountain. So we call it the peak or the summit of the mountain. A ridge, you can kind of see here, is where two sides of a mountain meet like this, and it forms a ridge between the two. A glacier, you may have seen before, heard the word used before. It's like a frozen river, pretty much. It's ice that kind of moves down the mountain. And the last one, is called a moraine, and that's basically where you get rock debris. You can see at the bottom there, there's kind of like scattered rocks at the bottom in front of a glacier that sort of pushes it down the mountain like that. These are just some of the features you might see around here. And because of the harsh environment, there are things like these that form. This is called a crevasse. A crevasse. And this is basically like a really big crack in a glacier. They can be like 50 meters deep and are obviously incredibly difficult for mountaineers to climb across. I wonder if you can think how they would manage to get over this or get around this sort of problem when climbing up a mountain. I'm going to show you, so have a guess. Because this is what they have to do. This is a Sherpa, and he's carrying a ladder across a ladder bridge. So this is a ladder bridge here. And effectively, you have to walk across the rungs of the ladder to cross this with a 50-meter drop. This is actually, in 1953, this is on the expeditions, how they travelled across these crevices. So this is Edmund Hillary. I think that is actually Tenzing Norgay who's doing the travelling across with the step ladder. So have a think now, what other types of problem and dangers do you think there are in the Everest environment? Have a think. This is Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay as they approach the summit. But think about the sort of different problems there might be on a mountain like this. What sort of issues might there be in terms of how the environment might be cause damage to the climbers? Have a go at listing as many as you can think of. Pause the video here before I show you a few as well. So the first one you may have thought about is really evident in this picture here. What do you think these canisters are on their backs that they're carrying up the mountain? Well, they're actually effectively oxygen canisters, almost oxygen cylinders, and they're needed because up on the top of Mount Everest there's a lot less oxygen and you need oxygen to breathe, so it's there to help them breathe and survive up in the high altitudes. And as well as that, the higher up you go, the more likely you are to get something called altitude sickness. People can't really live for a very long time above 5,000 meters up in the air. The air's thinner and it makes you feel quite ill because you don't get enough oxygen in the brain. It can make you weak and nauseous or sick and things like that as well. In order to cure that, they have to go actually back down the mountain and get to a place where there's higher oxygen as well. Think as well about how it might, obviously it's very, very cold there. Think about what happens to you when you're super, super cold. When you've been outside maybe the other day when it was snowing, did your hands, how did they feel when it was super, super cold? And if it gets so cold, you can get to a temperature whereby blood stops reaching the body's extremities, so tips of your fingers and tips of your toes, and something called frostbite can happen in really, really, really extreme cases. And that can basically mean that those parts of your body can fully die off and just fall off. You might lose a toe or something in extreme cases of frostbite. As well as that, it's really, really difficult to see because of the snow. It's called snow blindness. You can get things like the bright light reflected off the snowy terrain. So they have to wear these special goggles you can see them wearing. And obviously also things like snowfall as well would also be difficult. Also, it's really, and one thing that's unrelated but also quite a different problem is it takes ages to boil a cup of water because of the pressure and the extreme temperature. It was reported it can take up to 2 hours just to boil enough water, which obviously is they're boiling snow, in order to make a cup of tea. 2 hours to do that. So have to be in their camp at nighttime perhaps. So really today we're learning about the first successful ascent of Mount Everest. And this was between Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. And Edmund Hillary was born on the 20th of July 1919 in Auckland in New Zealand. And he had tried to previously climb Mount Everest in the 1950s, 1951. Tenzing Norgay, on the other hand, this man, he was born in Tibet in 1914 in a small village nearby Mount Everest. And it's said, destined, when he was a baby boy, a holy man in their village said he was destined for great thing. And this is why he was given the name Norgay, which means fortunate one in their language. They were both quite keen on adventure and expeditions, and they'd always been involved in lots of climbing and other things around there. In 1953, Edmund Hillary and another man called Colonel John Hunt attempted to climb Mount Everest with a huge team. These days you wouldn't take, it might be a small team, 5-10 different people going with you when climbing. This back then was 400 people were involved in this team. There were people who had to help with the equipment, people who had to help actually do the climbing, people preparing things, scientists and people as well. And this is the equipment they would have to have carried. So this is all the baggage. In total, it was 7.5 tons carried by 350 porters. It took more than 12 people just to carry the money they needed to pay them with. Obviously today, mountaineering equipment is a lot lighter, a lot smaller, and the teams are much smaller as well. So that's what it would have been back then, which is crazy. And on the 28th of May, sorry, actually let's start with April. In April, the team had arrived at the base camp, which is like a high up point, but not, it's like the beginning of the main part of the mountain. And then from there, they dropped off tents, food, oxygen and things, and they began to start planning their adventure. So this is them on the morning on their way to establish Camp 9, which is where they were going to start their adventure from. When they did this, it was quoted that he said, Tenzing Norgay said, the wind sounded like the roar of 1,000 tigers up there, and the temperature was minus 34 degrees with hurricane force winds. So this is not an easy task. And at 6:30 in the morning, the next day, they were woke to clear skies. So they began, this would be the day that they had to go and start. But Hillary's boots had frozen because he hadn't put them inside his sleeping bag, and he had to thaw them out on a stove in the morning. So he had to like almost cook his shoes. Carrying 2 full oxygen cylinders, they then trudged onto the summit, every step being a huge effort. And they followed the footsteps of the previous climbers who had tried to reach the summit but not succeeded. Just before they reached the summit is a 12-meter high rock face, and Hillary wedged himself inside a small chimney-sized crack and climbed and climbed and heaved and squirmed his way up. This final cliff is now called the Hillary Step, and the summit was still a bit further away, but by 11:30 that morning they had reached it. And this is where that famous picture was taken. When they were up there, Hillary allegedly took off his mittens and tried to shake hands with Tenzing, but then Tenzing gave him a big hug instead and thumped him on the back. And Hillary took this photograph with the unfurled flag and his attached to his ice axe. And then Hillary took more photos going down the side of the mountain to sort of prove they'd been there. And they made some offerings, apparently, to some gods in the snow, including some sweets that were given to him by his daughter. And Hillary buried a small cross that he'd been given by Colonel John Hunt, who was the guy who was planning the whole thing alongside with them. In total, they only spent 15 minutes up there on the top of the summit. And they also, on the way back down, had a well-earned hot cup of tea. And they made it back to their tent by 2 p.m. that evening and stopped there. They then continued the rest of the way down, and apparently when they were first seen, he looked so miserable that he thought that they'd failed their attempt. But it was actually just that they were very, very, very tired from everything they'd done. And here they are again at the bottom on their camp after they finished their ascent of Mount Everest. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay. And interesting as well, the thing I'd learned today was that in similar ways to modern day stories being like owned by certain newspapers, the Times had an exclusive on the story. So a coded telegram was sent to them telling them the news first before anyone else received it. So what do I want you to do with all the information from what you've learned today and what you've seen about this story? Well, I've also attached a small little video for you to watch as well, which you can watch, which just goes over how a little bit more about the climb and how it's been 60 years, well, a little bit more than that now, 67, hold on, this is all well out of date. Yeah, 68 years since the climb happened. What I'd like to do is write a short diary entry as though you were either Edmund Hillary, Sir Edmund Hillary as he's now known, or Tenzing Norgay after their ascent. Your diary should hopefully include some of the geographical vocabulary that we've looked at today. Things like talking about the summit would be really, really good. If you could talk about them climbing up the side of the mountain and reaching the peak and the summit, that would be great. And you might also talk about them having to cross a crevice or crevasse, going across like this. As well as that, it should include some facts and information about the mountain, the things they would have to have taken up with them perhaps, and things about their endeavours, their travel, their journey up the side. And what we'll then do is we'll share some of those diary entries with everyone so we can see what it might have been like for these adventurers climbing Mount Everest. I've attached a small a blank file that you can do your work into, I've also attached a short example, which I will show you now, which is another child's work that is one you could use some examples from. So here's what they've done. It says, "Dear Diary, the cold, relentless nights and days were all worth it in the end, because now Edmund Hillary and I can say I was one of the first people to reach the summit of Everest, the highest point on Earth. I knew from the first time I climbed Everest as a Sherpa, I wanted to reach the summit. We found many troubles on the ascent of Everest. Edmund forgot to keep his boots on when we went to sleep at Camp 9, so in the morning we had to thaw them on the stove. The view from the peak was breathtaking. However, I can't say that for the noise at Camp 9. It was like the roar of 1,000 tigers. When we reached the summit, I felt on top of the world, literally. Most of all, I felt proud. We stayed on the peak of Chumulungma, which is the Sherpa word for the Nepalese name for the mountain. It's literally the next sentence. For 15 minutes, and in that time, we buried something significant to us. I buried a couple of sweets that my darling daughter had given to me as an offering to the gods. And Edmund Hillary buried the cross. I sit here today on the 29th of May 1953 at Camp 8, the base camp, and say I reached the summit of Everest. If it is a shame to be the second Mount Everest, then I will have to live with this shame." Strange ending, but the rest really quite good. Signed, T. Norgay. So, this is the sort of thing I'd like to try and produce today. A nice diary entry describing what it was like on your adventure. You can use some of the information I've shown you in this video and anything else you can see by researching the story of Edmund Hillary as well. Have a go and either write this by hand and design it like this, or fill it out into the attached file. Good luck!